Across almost every landmass on Earth, the ground belongs to a single group of insects. With a population in the quadrillions, ants make up nearly half the planet's total insect biomass. This raises a question of evolutionary mechanics. How did a physically small, vulnerable organism achieve such absolute dominance? Their success was not driven by individual strength. It was the result of a series of radical structural and genetic bargains. To occupy nearly every terrestrial niche, the ant lineage transitioned into a state where individual autonomy became secondary to the survival of the group. 100 million years ago, the ancestors of the modern ant were solitary. These ancient hunters operated independently, beginning to diverge from wasps. Species like Sphecomyrma frey show the early signs of this divergence. They possessed a primitive wasp-like head, but had already developed the distinctively pinched waist of ants. Another relative, Zygrisimicea, known as the Iron Maiden ant, featured a head covered in dense, spiky armor. These tools were highly specialized for trapping prey without assistance from a colony. These Cretaceous ancestors were fierce predators, but they were limited by their independence. Each individual was responsible for its own survival and its own hunt. While these independent predators were successful on a small scale, their ecological impact was constrained. True dominance would require a complete shift in their social organization. Evidence of that social shift is preserved in Cretaceous amber, containing a group of Gerontoformica ants. This fossil contains 3 adult ants and an immobile, sessile pupa. It is the earliest material proof of cooperative brood transport, the act of adults caring for the young of the collective. This inclusion provides a tangible record of the shift toward communal life, showing that the foundational behaviors of a superorganism were already active 100 million years ago. Transitioning to a ground-based life required a major anatomical trade-off, the permanent loss of flight. It is a common misconception that worker ants are simply smaller, wingless versions of their queens. In reality, their entire thoracic architecture is unique. In a typical flying insect, the thorax is dominated by the second segment, or T2, filled with massive flight muscles. In worker ants, the T2 segment is drastically reduced and the flight muscles deleted, creating an internal void and removing the hardware required for flight. This anatomical clearing out was a strategic investment, making room for a different kind of biological weapon. With the wing muscles gone, the ant's first thoracic segment, the T1, expanded. This space became packed with hypertrophied, super-dense neck muscles. Instead of moving wings, these massive muscles drive the head's articulation and the mandible's power. This trade-off provides immense mechanical leverage. Worker ants can lift and carry objects 50 to 90 times their own body weight, completely off the ground. Abandoning the sky gave ants the industrial superstrength to manipulate their environment with extreme efficiency. Physical capability is only one half of the equation. Ground dominance also required a mechanism to coordinate thousands of individuals into a single cohesive unit. This is achieved through eusociality, the highest level of animal sociality, where the majority is sterile and dedicated entirely to the colony's survival. From an evolutionary perspective, this is a paradox. Why would any organism sacrifice its fundamental ability to pass on its own genes? The answer lies in the genetic system of haplodiploidy. In ants, males develop from unfertilized eggs, carrying one set of chromosomes. Because of this, female workers share 75% of their genes with sisters. If they had their own offspring, they'd share only 50%. In the genetic calculus of haplodiploidy, a female ant can propagate more of her own genetic material by raising sisters than by producing her own offspring. This mathematical imbalance forms the foundation of colony cohesion. This system allows the modern queen to focus entirely on reproduction, but it comes at a high physical cost. Ancient queens had to forage on the surface, risking the entire colony every time they left the nest. The modern claustral queen has evolved a safer, more isolating strategy. She seals herself underground in total darkness to birth the first generation of her colony alone. During this period of isolation, she performs an irreversible sacrifice. She begins to break down and digest her own massive flight muscles. She metabolizes her own tissue into nutrient-rich secretions, feeding her first generation of workers using the energy once reserved for her wings. The transition from a solitary hunter in the Cretaceous to a global superorganism was fueled by these specific structural and genetic trade-offs. By abandoning individual reproduction and the freedom of flight, the ant inherited the Earth. Watch a single ant rushing across the pavement, and you might see a simple automaton. That perception makes biological sense. A human brain runs on 86 billion neurons. An ant operates on roughly 250,000. Yet that tiny processor drives a species that constructs intricate subterranean cities with ventilation systems, moves thousands of tons of topsoil globally, and operates agricultural networks that have survived for millions of years. This creates a mathematical paradox. 250,000 neurons simply cannot process the logic required to build a city. The individual lacks the processing power to comprehend the architecture it is creating. The solution lies in how those individuals connect. A colony is a highly advanced, decentralized biological network, executing an incredibly efficient code honed over 100 million years. To run a network of that size, you need a flawless communication protocol. And because most of these ants build their infrastructure deep underground, they have to do it in absolute darkness. They solve this spatial blindness using a dense chemical language driven by specialized pheromones. When a worker finds a food source, a specialized organ called the Defore's gland leaves a microscopic chemical droplet on the ground. As other ants stumble upon this scent, they follow it, depositing their own pheromones along the exact same path. A single discovery recursively multiplies into a high-traffic, heavily fortified superhighway. The network also acts as a decentralized security system. If a threat breaches the colony, workers release a completely different set of volatile compounds from their mandibular and poison glands. The moment neighboring ants detect this specific chemical signature, they instantly accelerate and swarm the target. Chemicals take time to diffuse, so ants augment this system with acoustic data. By rubbing specialized body segments together, a process called stridulation, they broadcast physical distress vibrations through the soil during cave-ins or territorial battles. Millions of virtually blind units use these overlapping chemical trails and acoustic alarms as an organic routing algorithm. The entire collective moves in perfect sync, entirely without a central commander. But not all environments allow for chemical routing. In the scorching heat of the Sahara Desert, the Cataglyphus ant navigates a vast, hostile landscape completely devoid of landmarks. Surface temperatures here can exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Any chemical trail laid on this sand evaporates instantly. To survive, the desert ant relies exclusively on its own internal hardware. As the ant leaves the nest, its nervous system runs a continuous vector calculation known as path integration. It constantly tracks its exact distance and direction from home. It measures distance using a stride integrator, literally counting its own footsteps. To maintain direction, its compound eyes read the polarization of the sun's light across the sky. This image illustrates the internal hardware processing that biometric data. The blue and green structures represent the central complex. This microscopic bundle of neurons acts as the ant's navigational computer, constantly crunching the stride and solar data to generate a precise mathematical vector pointing straight back to the nest. Because path integration accumulates minor mathematical errors over long distances, a secondary system takes over for the final approach. Looking at the red structures situated above the central complex, we see the mushroom bodies. This region captures distinct visual snapshots of the horizon as the ant approaches the nest, allowing it to micro-correct its final trajectory. 250,000 neurons flawlessly compress astronomical positioning and biometric stride data into a highly efficient spatial algorithm. When you take those individual biological algorithms and stack them into a colony of millions, the output scales up to shape the macroscopic world. In the Amazon, leafcutter ants systematically harvest immense volumes of living foliage. They don't eat the leaves, they shred them to cultivate a highly specialized subterranean fungus, managing a mutualistic agricultural operation that sustains millions of workers. High in the canopy, weaver ants construct elaborate suspended cities. To stitch living leaves together, workers physically carry their own silk-producing larvae, using them as living glue guns to build structurally sound nests. On the forest floor, over 11,000 plant species rely on a transaction called myrmecochory. The plants attach fatty, nutrient-dense structures to their seeds. Ants harvest the fat for food, and in the process, carry the seeds deep underground into protected, aerated soil. These colonies execute a strict resource management protocol. By distributing seeds, managing soil composition, and pruning the canopy, the swarm literally plants and maintains the structural integrity of global ecosystems. The mathematical efficiency of the colony is so precise that modern computer science has begun lifting the code directly from the insects. We call it ant colony optimization, or ACO. Look at this dense labyrinth of physical telecommunications wiring. To route data through complex networks like this, engineers use ACO algorithms that directly mimic the chemical feedback loops of ant pheromones, mathematically finding the path of least resistance through millions of potential nodes. That same logic is now pushing physical hardware into full autonomy. Robotics labs are programming mechanical arms and drones to execute tasks based on decentralized ant rules, removing the need for a human operator. When exploring extreme, unmapped environments, like deep underground mine tunnels, a single remote-controlled robot can easily lose signal or get stuck, but a swarm of small drones, communicating and reacting based on biological ant algorithms, can map a collapsing tunnel system entirely on its own. By studying a species we step over on the sidewalk, we uncover a masterclass in decentralized computing. The ant provides the biological blueprint for the future of human technology.